I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway on that frigid Tuesday afternoon in February and saw my entire firewood stack had vanished from the side of my house in Boulder, Colorado. Let me back up a bit. My name is Jacob Sinclair, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision for about 3 years at that point. I had bought my modest 2-story home specifically because it had a wood-burning fireplace, and living at the base of the Rockies meant I could actually use it regularly during our brutal winters. I had spent the better part of last October cutting, splitting, and stacking nearly 2 full cords of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir that a friend with property up in Nederland had sold me for a great price. That wood represented countless hours of backbreaking labor and about $800 between the raw logs and renting a splitter for the weekend. The stack had been a thing of beauty, honestly. I had arranged it meticulously against the north wall of my house, covered with a heavy-duty tarp to keep the snow and moisture off. Every piece had been split to the perfect size for my fireplace, and I had been burning through it slowly all winter, enjoying the warmth and the satisfaction of knowing I had done the work myself. Now it was just gone. The tarp lay crumpled on the ground, and the concrete pad where I had stacked everything was completely bare, except for a few scattered wood chips and bark fragments. I stood there in the cold, my breath forming clouds in front of my face, trying to process what I was seeing. For a moment, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had I somehow forgotten where I put it? No, that was ridiculous. The stack had been right there that very morning when I left for work. I walked around my property, checking if maybe someone had moved it as some kind of prank, but there was nothing. My neighbors on either side were an elderly couple named the Martins and a young family with 2 kids. Neither seemed like the type to steal firewood, and besides, moving 2 cords of wood would have required a truck and considerable effort. This was not a spur-of-the-moment theft. That is when I noticed the tire tracks. The snow in my side yard had been churned up, and I could see distinct impressions where a vehicle had backed up close to where my woodpile had been. The tracks led back out to the street, but of course, they disappeared once they hit the plowed asphalt. I pulled out my phone and was about to call the police when I remembered something. About a month earlier, I had been sitting at my kitchen table reading an article online about property theft in rural areas. The article mentioned how some ranchers and farmers had started using ultraviolet marking systems to identify their equipment and property in case of theft. At the time, I had thought it was clever, but never imagined I would need something like that. Then, about 3 weeks ago, I had been at a hardware store picking up some supplies, and I saw UV marking pens on sale. On a whim, I had bought one, thinking it might be useful for marking my tools or something. What I had actually done was mark every single piece of firewood in my stack. It had been a Saturday afternoon, and I was feeling particularly paranoid after hearing about a string of thefts in the neighborhood. Someone had stolen a lawn mower from the Hendersons 2 streets over, and the Chens had reported their patio furniture missing. I had taken that UV marker and spent 2 hours going through my entire woodpile, making small marks on the cut ends of each piece. I had drawn my initials, JS, on every single log. The marks were invisible to the naked eye but would glow bright blue under a UV blacklight. I had kept the blacklight flashlight I used to check my work in my garage, and I still had the receipt for the UV marker tucked away in my desk drawer. At the time, it had seemed almost paranoid, maybe even a little crazy. Now it seemed like the smartest thing I had ever done. I called the Boulder Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me an officer would come by to take a report, but she was honest enough to admit that firewood theft cases rarely got solved. People would see some wood for sale on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, buy it cheap, and never know it was stolen. I told her about my UV marking system, and she sounded more interested then, saying it might actually give us a chance if we could locate the wood. Officer David Chen showed up about 45 minutes later. He was a patient guy, probably in his early 30s, and he took my statement seriously, even though I could tell he had probably dealt with 100 similar petty theft cases. I showed him the tire tracks, the empty space where the wood had been, and explained my UV marking system in detail. "That is actually pretty smart," he said, making notes on his tablet. "If we can find the wood, those marks would definitely help establish ownership." "Do you have any idea who might have taken it?" I shook my head. "Not really. I mean, I have not had any disputes with my neighbors or anything. Everyone around here seems pretty normal." "What about your HOA?" he asked. "Any issues there?" I grimaced. The Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association was a touchy subject. For the most part, they were reasonable, but our HOA president, Patricia Donaldson, was what you might charitably call overzealous. She was in her late 40s, had short blonde hair that she kept in that classic Karen cut, and seemed to believe that her position gave her authority over every aspect of our lives. She had cited me twice in the past year, once for leaving my trash bins visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, and once because she claimed my lawn had exceeded the maximum allowable grass height of 3 inches. I had measured my lawn after that second citation, and found it was exactly 2¾ inches, but arguing with Patricia was like arguing with a brick wall. "Our HOA president is pretty strict about rules," I said carefully, "but I cannot imagine why she would steal my firewood." Officer Chen nodded. "Well, keep an eye on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes thieves try to sell stolen goods quickly. If you see anything that looks like your wood, give us a call. Do not approach them yourself." After he left, I went inside and sat at my kitchen table fuming. I made myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop, starting to search through local online marketplaces. Nothing appeared immediately, but I set up alerts for firewood listings within a 50-mile radius. The next morning, Wednesday, I got up early and checked my phone. 3 new firewood listings had posted overnight, but 2 were clearly commercial operations selling full cords, and the third was someone in Longmont selling a small amount of aspen, which was not what I had. I got ready for work, still angry about the whole situation but not sure what else I could do. I work as a civil engineer for a consulting firm in Denver, which means I have about a 40-minute commute when traffic is decent. That morning, I was sitting at a red light on Highway 36, barely awake despite my coffee, when my phone buzzed with another alert. Someone had just posted a listing for firewood in Boulder. The listing was sparse on details, just saying, "Seasoned firewood, you haul with an address and a price of $300 for approximately 1½ cords." The address made my heart jump. It was right here in Meadowbrook Heights, just 4 streets over from my house. I pulled into a parking lot and looked at the listing more carefully. The poster had used the name Patricia D., and while there were no photos, something about this felt very wrong. $300 was way too cheap for that amount of seasoned wood, especially in the middle of winter when demand was high. And the timing, less than 24 hours after my wood disappeared, was awfully convenient. Could Patricia Donaldson, HOA president and neighborhood busybody, have actually stolen my firewood? I sat there trying to think of any legitimate reason why Patricia would suddenly have a large amount of firewood to sell. As far as I knew, she did not have a wood-burning fireplace. Her house was one of the newer builds in the neighborhood, all electric with forced air heating. I had been inside once for an HOA meeting she hosted, and I definitely did not remember seeing a fireplace or wood stove. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. It had to be her. I called in sick to work, which I almost never did, but this was too important. Then I called Officer Chen back and told him what I had found. He sounded skeptical at first, probably thinking I was jumping to conclusions, but he said he would look into it. I also called my buddy Marcus, who lived over in Louisville and owned a pickup truck. "Hey man, I need a huge favor," I said when he picked up. "Someone stole all my firewood yesterday, and I think I found it. I need your truck and your help." Marcus, bless him, did not even hesitate. "Give me 30 minutes. I will be there." While I waited for Marcus, I grabbed my UV flashlight from the garage and made sure it was working. The purple light blazed bright, and when I shined it on a test mark I had made on a piece of scrap wood, my initials glowed electric blue. I also dug out the receipt for the UV marker, dated from 3 weeks ago, and took photos of the test mark with my phone, making sure to capture both normal and UV light images. Marcus showed up right on time, driving his big Ford F-150. He was a contractor and always reliable, the kind of friend you want when you are in a jam. I explained the whole situation as we drove over to Patricia's address. "Dude, your HOA president stole your firewood," Marcus said, shaking his head. "That is insane. What was she thinking?" "I have no idea," I said. "Maybe she thought I would not notice, or that I could not prove it was mine. I honestly do not know." Patricia's house was a large 2-story colonial painted light gray with white trim. It was immaculate, of course, with a perfectly maintained lawn even in winter and decorative shutters that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. We pulled up out front, and I could immediately see the woodpile. It was stacked neatly in her side yard, covered with a blue tarp that was definitely not the brown one I had been using. My stomach clenched with anger when I saw it. That was my wood. I could see it from here, the same mix of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, the same size splits. I had spent hours working on that wood, and she had just taken it like it was nothing. I got out of the truck, and Marcus followed. Before I could even get to the front door, Patricia came out of her house. She was wearing a navy blue pantsuit, despite it being barely 8 in the morning, and her expression was already annoyed. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "And why did you park that truck on the street? You know we have regulations about commercial vehicles in residential areas." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Patricia, I am here about the firewood you posted for sale online. That is my wood. It was stolen from my property yesterday." Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, indignation, and finally settling on haughty denial. "I do not know what you are talking about. I purchased this wood legally from a seller on Facebook Marketplace. I have every right to resell it if I choose." "Who did you buy it from?" I asked. "I do not have to tell you that," she said, crossing her arms, "and I would appreciate it if you left my property immediately. You are making unfounded accusations, and I could file a complaint with the police for harassment." "That is funny," I said, "because I already filed a complaint with the police about my stolen firewood, and I can prove that wood is mine." She laughed, an unpleasant sound. "Prove it. Firewood is firewood, Jacob. You cannot prove anything." I held up my UV flashlight. "Actually, I can. I marked every piece of that wood with my initials using an ultraviolet marker 3 weeks ago. If that is your wood that you legally purchased, you will not mind if I check it, right?" The color drained from Patricia's face, and I knew I had her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "You cannot just come onto my property and start examining my belongings. That is trespassing." Actually, if it is stolen property, I have every right to identify it, I said. This was a bit of a legal gray area, but I was betting Patricia did not know that. And the police are already aware of the situation. Officer Chen from the Boulder PD is looking into this case. Right on cue, my phone rang. It was Officer Chen. Mr. Sinclair. I am about 5 minutes from the address you gave me. Do not do anything until I get there. No problem, officer. We will wait right here. I made sure to say it loud enough for Patricia to hear. She looked panicked now, glancing between me, Marcus, and the woodpile. This is ridiculous. I am calling my lawyer. That is probably a good idea, Marcus said quietly. We stood there in awkward silence for the next 5 minutes until Officer Chen pulled up in his patrol car. He got out, and I noticed he had brought another officer with him, a woman whose name tag read Martinez. Miss Donaldson, Officer Chen said politely. I understand there is a dispute about this firewood. Mr. Sinclair claims it was stolen from his property yesterday and that he can identify it with UV markings. Would you be willing to allow us to examine the wood? Patricia had regained some of her composure. I purchased this wood in good faith from a seller online. I have done nothing wrong. If it was stolen, I am a victim here too. Who did you purchase it from? Officer Martinez asked. Patricia hesitated. I would have to check my messages. It was someone local, but I do not remember the name off the top of my head. Can you check now? Officer Chen asked. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly. After a moment, she said, the account appears to have been deleted. The entire conversation is gone. Officer Chen and I exchanged glances. That was convenient. Miss Donaldson, Officer Chen said, would you consent to allowing Mr. Sinclair to demonstrate his UV marking system? If the wood is not marked, then clearly it is not his, and this will all be settled. If it is marked, then we have probable cause to believe it is stolen property. Patricia looked trapped. If she refused, it would look suspicious. If she agreed and I was right, she was caught. Fine, she said finally. But I want it on record that I am cooperating fully and that I believed I purchased this wood legally. I walked over to the woodpile with my UV flashlight, Officer Chen and Officer Martinez following. Marcus stayed back with Patricia, probably to make sure she did not try to run or interfere. I pulled back the blue tarp and selected a piece of wood from the top of the pile. Even in daylight, even covered by a different tarp, I recognized it. This was my wood. I turned on the UV flashlight and shined it on the cut end of the log. Immediately, my initials glowed bright blue JS exactly as I had drawn them 3 weeks ago. Officer Chen leaned in close and I heard him exhale slowly. Well, he said, that is pretty definitive. I grabbed another piece, then another. Every single one I checked had my marks. Some were on the ends, some on the sides where I had marked split faces. All of them glowed that unmistakable blue under the UV light. Miss Donaldson, Officer Martinez called out, can you come here, please? Patricia walked over slowly, and her face when she saw the glowing marks was a mixture of shock and resignation. She had to have known she was caught. Those could have been put there by anyone, she said weakly. How do we know you did not just mark this wood this morning? I pulled out my phone and showed Officer Chen the photos I had taken weeks ago. I documented the marking system when I did it. I have time-stamped photos showing the UV marks under my test piece. I also have the receipt for the UV marker from 3 weeks ago. I handed him the receipt I had brought. Officer Chen examined everything carefully. Miss Donaldson, this is looking pretty bad for you. Do you want to tell us what really happened? For a long moment, I thought Patricia was going to keep denying everything. Then something in her seemed to break. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked at the ground. I saw the woodpile at Jacob's house during my property inspections last week, she said quietly. It was not properly screened from the street, which is a violation of our HOA rules. I was going to cite him for it, but then I thought about how expensive firewood has gotten this year. My daughter Emily lives in Denver, and her heating bill has been astronomical. She was complaining about it over dinner, and I thought maybe if I could get her some firewood, she could use the fireplace in her apartment and save some money on heating. I stared at her, incredulous. So you just stole my firewood? You could not have just asked me, or bought your own. I was going to leave money, Patricia said defensively. I was going to calculate fair market value and put an envelope in your mailbox. But then I got busy and I figured you had so much wood, you probably would not even notice some missing. Some, I said, my voice rising. You took all of it. 2 full cords. That is not some, Patricia, that is everything. Officer Chen held up a hand. Miss Donaldson, I need to inform you that you are being charged with theft. Given the value of the property involved, this is going to be a misdemeanor charge. You have the right to remain silent. Wait, Patricia interrupted. Charged? You are arresting me over firewood. Over approximately $800 worth of firewood that you stole from someone's property, Officer Martinez corrected. Yes, we are arresting you. I watched as they read Patricia her rights and put her in handcuffs. Part of me felt bad, seeing this proud woman reduced to this, but a larger part of me was still furious about the whole situation. She had stolen from me, tried to sell my property, and only confessed when faced with irrefutable evidence. And her excuse, that she was going to leave money that she thought I would not notice, it was all just rationalization for theft. Officer Chen turned to me. We will need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. You will also need to document the value of the wood for the charges. Do you have receipts for the original purchase? I have texts with my friend who sold me the logs, I said. And I have the rental receipt for the splitter. I can put together a full accounting. Good. You can take your wood back now. We have documented everything we need for evidence. Marcus and I spent the next 2 hours loading my firewood back into his truck and hauling it back to my house. It took 3 trips, and my arms were sore by the end of it, but it felt good to have my property back. As we worked, neighbors started coming out to see what was happening. The news that Patricia Donaldson, HOA president, had been arrested for theft spread through Meadowbrook Heights like wildfire. Mrs. Martin from next door came over as we were unloading the last trip. She was in her 70s, a sweet woman who always had cookies at the holidays. Jacob, I heard what happened. I cannot believe Patricia would do such a thing. We saw a truck at your house yesterday afternoon while you were at work, but we thought maybe you had hired someone to move the wood. What time was this? I asked. Oh, around 2 o'clock, I think. It was a white pickup truck. The driver backed it right up to your woodpile and started loading. Did you see who was driving? She shook her head. No, I am sorry. I just assumed it was someone you hired. We did not think anything of it. I thanked her for the information and made a note to tell Officer Chen. After we finished restacking the wood and securing it with my original brown tarp, Marcus and I sat on my porch with a couple of beers, even though it was barely lunchtime. That was crazy, Marcus said, taking a long drink. I cannot believe she actually stole all your firewood. And then tried to sell it. The thing that gets me, I said, is that she is the HOA president. She is supposed to be upholding community standards, making sure people follow the rules, and she just commits theft like it is nothing. Power corrupts, man, Marcus said. She probably thought she was above the rules because of her position. Over the next few days, the fallout from Patricia's arrest continued. I gave my formal statement to the police, provided all my documentation, and learned that Patricia had been released on bail but was facing a court date in about 6 weeks. The HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss her position, and by unanimous vote of the board, she was removed as president. Apparently, this was not the first time Patricia had been accused of overstepping her authority. Several other homeowners came forward with stories of her confiscating property she deemed violations, from yard decorations to potted plants, though none of them had ever filed formal complaints. The new interim HOA president was a guy named Robert Shepard, an accountant in his 50s, who seemed much more reasonable. He called me personally to apologize on behalf of the association, and to assure me that they would be reviewing all of Patricia's citations and rules enforcement actions to make sure everything had been done properly. "Between you and me," Robert said on the phone, "Patricia had been getting complaints for months. She was incredibly strict about enforcement, to the point where people were afraid to do anything with their properties. We have homeowners who wanted to paint their front doors, but were afraid she would cite them for unauthorized color changes. This arrest, as unfortunate as it is, might actually be the push we needed to reform how this HOA operates." I appreciated his honesty. "I just want to make sure this does not happen to anyone else," I said. "It would not," Robert assured me. "We are implementing new procedures and oversight. No single board member will have unilateral authority anymore." About 3 weeks after the theft, I got a call from the district attorney's office. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, wanted to discuss a plea deal. "Miss Donaldson's attorney has approached us about a plea agreement," she explained. "She is willing to plead guilty to misdemeanor theft if we agree to recommend probation instead of jail time. She would also pay full restitution for the value of the wood, plus your costs for recovering it. What are your thoughts?" I thought about it carefully. "What would the restitution amount be? Based on your documentation, we are calculating $800 for the wood, $200 for the splitter rental, and we can include your friend's truck rental costs and your time. We are thinking about $1,200 total." That seemed fair. "And she would have a criminal record?" "Yes. A guilty plea to misdemeanor theft would be on her record. She would also be on probation for a year, during which she would have to complete community service hours and stay out of trouble." "I think that sounds reasonable," I said. "I do not want to ruin her life over this, but I do want her to face consequences and understand that what she did was serious." "Understood. I will let you know when the plea hearing is scheduled. You will have the opportunity to give a victim impact statement if you want." The plea hearing was scheduled for mid-March. I took the morning off work and drove to the Boulder County Courthouse. It was my first time inside a criminal courtroom, and I was surprised by how mundane it all seemed. Patricia was there with her lawyer, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. She looked smaller than I remembered, less intimidating without her HOA president authority. The proceedings were fairly quick. Patricia formally entered her guilty plea, and the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood up and kept it brief. "Your Honor, this situation has been difficult. I worked hard to prepare that firewood, and having it stolen felt like a personal violation. But more than that, I was disappointed because Miss Donaldson held a position of trust in our community, and she abused that trust. I hope she understands the impact of her actions, and that this teaches her to respect other people's property. I am satisfied with the plea agreement and the restitution." The judge nodded and turned to Patricia. "Miss Donaldson, do you have anything to say?" Patricia stood, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely remorseful. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mr. Sinclair. What I did was wrong, and I have no excuse for it." I let my desire to help my daughter cloud my judgment, and I violated someone's trust and property rights. I am ashamed of my actions, and I am prepared to accept the consequences. I will pay the full restitution, complete my community service, and I promise nothing like this will ever happen again. The judge accepted her plea and sentenced her according to the agreement. 12 months probation, 100 hours of community service, and $1,200 in restitution to be paid within 90 days. Patricia also had to attend a theft awareness class, which I had not even known existed. As we left the courtroom, Patricia approached me hesitantly. Her lawyer looked nervous, probably worried she was going to say something that would cause more problems, but she just said, "Jacob, I really am sorry. I know that does not fix what I did, but I want you to know I mean it." I looked at her for a moment, this woman who had been such a thorn in my side for years, who had stolen from me, and who now looked genuinely broken by what she had done. "I appreciate that, Patricia," I said finally. "I hope you learned something from this." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away with her lawyer. Life in Meadowbrook Heights slowly returned to normal after that, though the changes to the HOA were significant. Robert Shepard and the new board implemented a completely revised set of bylaws that included checks and balances, an appeals process for violations, and term limits for board members. The community felt different, less oppressive, more like a neighborhood where people actually wanted to live. My firewood stack remained untouched for the rest of the winter, though I did take the precaution of installing a security camera pointed at it. I also kept the UV markings, reapplying them whenever I replenished my supply. The story of how I caught Patricia had made the rounds not just in our neighborhood, but in the broader Boulder community. I even got a call from a local news station wanting to do a story about it, but I declined. I had gotten my wood back and seen justice done, and that was enough for me. Patricia did pay the full restitution within the 90-day deadline. She sent a check with a handwritten note apologizing again. I cashed the check and put the note in a drawer, not sure if I would ever read it again, but feeling like I should keep it. One interesting side effect of the whole situation was that I became something of a local expert on property marking and theft prevention. Several neighbors asked me about the UV marking system, and I ended up hosting an informal workshop in my garage one Saturday, where I showed about 15 people how to mark their tools, equipment, and other valuables. The local hardware store even started carrying UV markers more prominently, mentioning my case as an example of why they were useful. Marcus thought the whole thing was hilarious and still brings it up whenever we get together. "Remember that time you caught the HOA Karen with science?" he would say, laughing. That is still the best use of a UV marker I have ever heard of. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she completed her community service at a local food bank and moved out of Meadowbrook Heights a few months after her sentencing. Her daughter Emily ended up helping her sell the house, and they moved to a condo in Denver where there was no HOA for Patricia to worry about. I do not know if she learned her lesson in a deeper sense, but at least she paid her debt and moved on. The whole experience taught me several things. First, document everything. Those UV marks and the receipt for the marker were what made my case airtight. Without them, it would have been my word against hers, and I probably never would have gotten my wood back. Second, stand up for yourself. It would have been easy to just let the theft go, to write it off as a loss and move on. But by pursuing it, I not only got my property back, but helped expose a pattern of abuse by someone in a position of authority. And third, people will surprise you, sometimes in terrible ways, sometimes in redemptive ways. I still live in Meadowbrook Heights, and I still burn wood in my fireplace every winter. My stack is neatly arranged, properly tarped, and yes, still marked with UV ink. The security camera keeps watch, though I have not had any issues since Patricia. The new HOA is reasonable and actually helpful, focusing on maintaining property values and community standards without being oppressive about it. Sometimes on cold nights, when I am sitting by the fire watching the flames dance, I think about that whole crazy situation. The anger I felt when I discovered the theft, the satisfaction of proving my case with science, the surreal experience of watching the HOA president get arrested in her own front yard. It was one of the strangest chapters of my life, and while I would not want to go through it again, I am glad I handled it the way I did. The firewood that Patricia stole and that I recovered burned just as well as any other wood, providing warmth through the rest of that winter and into the next. Each piece, marked with my initials in invisible ink, was a small victory. Every time I added a log to the fire, I remembered that justice, even in small cases like firewood theft, matters. It matters because property rights matter, because honesty matters, because the social contract we live under only works if people respect it. I ran into Mrs. Martin last week, and she mentioned that the new family who bought Patricia's old house seemed very nice. They have a young daughter who plays in the yard, and they wave when they see neighbors. They do not have a wood-burning fireplace, but they do have a beautiful garden they are planning for the spring. It is nice to have friendly people in that house again, Mrs. Martin said. Patricia was always so stern, so focused on rules and violations. These people seem like they actually want to be part of the community. I agreed with her. Meadowbrook Heights felt like a real neighborhood now, not a place where people walked on eggshells worried about HOA citations. Kids played in yards without parents worrying that a ball would roll somewhere it should not. People painted their front doors cheerful colors. Someone even put up a little free library box, which Patricia would have had a fit about, and it became a beloved community fixture. The whole experience also changed how I thought about HOAs in general. They can be a force for good, maintaining standards and property values, organizing community events, and handling shared resources. But they can also be vehicles for petty tyranny when the wrong people get power without proper oversight. The reforms Robert and the board implemented, the checks and balances, the appeals processes, the transparency requirements, those were not just bureaucratic changes. They were safeguards against the next Patricia, whoever and whenever that might be. I expanded my personal security measures too, not out of paranoia but out of practicality. In addition to the camera watching my firewood, I installed a doorbell camera and one watching my driveway. I documented my property, taking photos of serial numbers, using the UV marker on expensive tools and equipment, and keeping receipts organized in a fireproof safe. If something ever got stolen again, I wanted to be able to prove it was mine. The UV marking system became something of a hobby for me. I marked not just firewood but my lawn mower, my snow blower, my bicycles, my tools, even some of the furniture in my garage. I developed a system where I would mark items with my initials, the date of purchase, and sometimes a unique code number that I kept in a spreadsheet. It was probably overkill, but after the firewood incident, I figured better safe than sorry. Marcus started using the system too after I showed him how it worked. He marked all his contractor equipment, thousands of dollars worth of tools and machinery. If any of this stuff gets stolen from a job site, he said, I want to be able to prove it is mine just like you did with your wood. He had heard too many stories of tools disappearing from construction sites and never being recovered. The local police department, even reached out to me about doing a presentation on property marking at a community safety event. I agreed, and one evening in April, I found myself standing in front of about 40 residents at the community center, demonstrating how UV markers worked and explaining how they had helped solve my case. Officer Chen came and spoke too, talking about how property marking made law enforcement's job easier and increased recovery rates for stolen items. Most theft cases are hard to prove, Officer Chen explained to the group. Even if we find stolen property without clear identifying marks, it is often impossible to establish ownership beyond a reasonable doubt. What Mr. Sinclair did with his UV marking system gave us exactly what we needed. We could see with our own eyes that the property was marked with his initials. We had documentation showing he had marked the property weeks before the theft, and we had receipts proving he owned the marking equipment. It made the case airtight. People asked questions about what to mark, how to mark it, where to buy UV markers and lights. Several people bought UV kits right there at the event. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction knowing that my experience, as frustrating as it had been, was helping other people protect their property. Spring turned into summer and life continued. I planted a garden, mowed my lawn, keeping it well under 3 inches out of habit, even though the new HOA would not have hassled me about it, and enjoyed my home. I started preparing for the next winter early, reaching out to my friend in Netherlands about getting another load of logs in August when prices were lower. I wanted to build up my supply again so I could burn freely without worrying about running out. When the logs arrived in late August, I spent another weekend splitting and stacking wood. This time, I was even more meticulous with my UV marking system. I marked each piece multiple times, sometimes on the ends, sometimes on split faces, sometimes on the bark if it was still attached. I photographed my marking process with timestamps, documented everything in my spreadsheet, and kept all receipts. If anyone ever stole from me again, they were going to face the same irrefutable evidence that had caught Patricia. But no one did steal from me. My woodpile sat undisturbed through the fall and into another winter. I burned it slowly, savoring the heat and the peace of mind that came with knowing my property was secure and documented. The legal case against Patricia officially closed about a year after the theft, when she completed all the terms of her probation. I got a notification from the DA's office that the case was resolved and closed. Patricia had completed her community service hours, paid all restitution, attended her theft awareness class, and stayed out of trouble for the required year. Her criminal record would remain, but she had fulfilled her obligation to the court and to me. I felt a sense of closure when I got that notification. The whole ordeal, from the theft to the arrest to the court proceedings to the final resolution, had taken about 14 months. It had been stressful and frustrating, but it had also been educational and ultimately satisfying. I had stood up for myself, used creative thinking to prove my case, and seen the legal system work the way it was supposed to. Looking back now, almost 2 years after the incident, I can see how much it changed me. I am more aware of my property and its security. I am more willing to stand up for myself when something is wrong. I am more appreciative of good neighbors and good community governance. And I am much more cynical about people in positions of authority who think their power puts them above the rules. But I also learned about redemption and forgiveness. Patricia did something terrible, but she also faced consequences, paid restitution, and by all accounts tried to make amends. I could have held onto my anger, could have refused to accept her apology or her attempts at reconciliation. But what good would that have done? She had been caught, punished, and had paid back what she took, Holding a grudge would only have hurt me, not her. The firewood burns the same whether I am angry or not. The warmth feels the same. And sitting by the fire on cold winter nights, I find myself thinking less about the theft and more about how lucky I am to have a warm home, good friends like Marcus, decent neighbors, and a community that, despite some bumps along the way, generally tries to do right by its members. My current woodpile is stacked neatly in the same spot where Patricia stole the last one. It is covered with my trusty brown tarp, marked extensively with UV ink, and watched over by my security cameras. But more than the physical security measures, it is protected by the fact that everyone in Meadowbrook Heights knows what happened last time someone tried to steal my firewood. The story has become part of neighborhood lore, the tale of how the HOA president got arrested for theft and how I used science to catch her. New residents hear about it when they move in, usually from someone like Mrs. Martin who loves to share neighborhood history. It serves as both entertainment and warning, a reminder that even people in authority are not above the law and that property rights matter. I still see Officer Chen occasionally when he is on patrol in the neighborhood. He always waves, and sometimes he stops to chat. Last time I saw him, he mentioned that the UV marking case had become something of a teaching example at the police department. Used to show new officers how good evidence gathering and creative property marking could solve cases that might otherwise be unsolvable. "You made my job a lot easier with those marks," he said. "Usually in theft cases like that, even if we suspect who did it, we cannot prove ownership. Your case was different. We had clear, documented, irrefutable evidence. I wish more people were as prepared as you were." As another winter approaches and I start to use my current supply of firewood, I find myself grateful for the whole experience, strange as that might sound. Yes, it was stressful and angering and time-consuming. Yes, I had to deal with theft and court proceedings and all sorts of hassle. But it also taught me valuable lessons, led to positive changes in the community, and gave me a story that I will probably tell for the rest of my life. Every time I add a log to the fire, especially one that I know is marked with my UV initials, I remember that justice prevailed. Patricia Donaldson learned that stealing has consequences. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA learned that unchecked authority leads to abuse. And I learned that preparing for the worst while hoping for the best is not paranoia. It is just good sense. The flames dance in my fireplace as I write this, the wood crackling and popping as it burns. Somewhere on each of those logs, invisible to the naked eye but glowing bright blue under UV light, are my initials, JS. They are a mark of ownership, yes, but also a mark of perseverance, of standing up for what is right, and of using creative solutions to solve problems. My home is warm, my firewood is secure, and my neighborhood is better than it was before Patricia's arrest sparked necessary reforms. Sometimes bad things happen that lead to good outcomes. Sometimes a simple act of theft becomes a catalyst for positive change. And sometimes the best defense against criminals is not just locks and cameras, but a UV marker and the determination to prove what is yours. The story of the stolen firewood has a happy ending, which is not always the case in theft situations. I got my property back, the thief faced justice, and the community benefited from reforms that made it a better place to live. If I had to go through it all again, would I? Probably not by choice. But would I do anything differently? Maybe I would have installed the security cameras sooner, but otherwise, no. I did what I needed to do, and it worked out. As winter settles in, and I continue burning through my carefully marked firewood supply, I do so with the satisfaction of knowing that every log is legitimately mine. paid for with my money and my labor, and protected by both technology and the rule of law. That is a kind of warmth that goes beyond just physical heat, a comfort that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself and won. The story ends not with anger or bitterness, but with warmth, both literal and metaphorical. The fire burns bright, the house is comfortable, and somewhere out in the world, a former HOA president hopefully learned an important lesson about respecting other people's property. And in Meadowbrook Heights, life goes on, a little bit better and a little bit fairer than it was before.